Faith is a religion-themed survival horror game developed by Airdorf for PC. It's split into 3 different chapters, aptly packaged as the Unholy Trinity. The player controls a priest whose main weapon is his crucifix and faith itself. Your enemy is that of demons and the second death cult who are trying to summon the Antichrist into our world. Faith uses Atari-like retro graphics, though there are many rotoscope cutscenes within that turn up the spook factor. The game does a very good job of trying to look like something from the 80s, using text-to-speech for dialogue,
What I am about to do has not been approved by the Vatican.
and 8-bit chiptune sound effects throughout. The game also gets its plot from the 80s, with heavy inspiration from the Satanic Panic that gripped many households at the time, and various demonic possession horror films, like The Exorcist for example. This video is going to attempt to wade through the unsettling narrative by uncovering what happens in each chapter of Faith and pulling all the loose threads together into something hopefully coherent. The game features a lot of note gathering, unreliable narration, and multiple endings to each chapter, so let's see how we get on. Expect spoilers and a warning for a quite dark and spooky narrative. Faith Chapter 1 came out in 2017, and it opens up with Father John Ward, a priest returning to the Martin family home on September 21st, 1987, to finish an exorcism that he'd failed to conclude a year previous, in 86. John gives us some background on the drive over, that he has to finish what he started, and what he's about to do has definitely not been approved by the Vatican. We have to wait until Faith 3 to see how the first exorcism actually went, but for now, John enters the woods surrounding the Martin family home, being hunted by some white demonic monster that cries out to him when it charges. We can repel this beast, and any beast in this game, with our crucifix. To raise the cross will damage any of our enemies, but at a trade-off of making us stand dead still while it's raised. The cross is enough to make the creature run off, and if we do it enough times, it drops a note for us, but we'll get to reading that a bit later. If the creature kills us, we do get a better look at it though. Actually going into the house isn't hard, with John just moving several screens to the north. The place is completely empty, and there's various notes in the house referencing Mrs. Martin, complaining about their daughter and their boy's safety. There's even a birthday flyer for her twin boys too. Mrs. Martin seems to be a stay-at-home wife, whereas Bob Martin, her husband, is a missionary doing work away in Nicaragua. Now we have to pull forth some information we find in other places here about Mr. and Mrs. Martin. Mrs. Martin never gave birth to her twins. She miscarried, and this led to her having delusions and constant psychological relapses about the boys' existence. She even hosts them these birthday parties despite them not being there. Mr. Martin sends home a doll from his mission work for his daughter Amy, and this causes the wife to relapse again, believing she can make some sort of replacements for her sons. But just hold that thought for now. There's a ton of notes in the house detailing the previous exorcism from John's point of view, because, he's also a little bit batty. We'll wait for those though, as there's a flashback in a later chapter. John begins looking around the house for Amy, stumbling upon a ritual circle in the basement. He then comes face to face with her. And here, I have a warning for the audio.
She is here.
She will then hunt John around the house, sneaking up to him and requiring a healthy dose of the cross to be repelled. Do this enough and the attic will open. John writes a letter to his wife, essentially saying, "The church might contact you in a few days to tell you their version of what happened to me." He details the original exorcism earlier, in which Amy had killed her parents and the other priest John was with, and he's writing this note because he knows he might not make it out of this, but still, he goes up into the attic. And we have to use the crucifix on Amy in a boss fight, while avoiding any other demons that try to swarm us. We get a phase transition showing that where Amy's face should be, there's just a red void. I don't think Holy Power can reverse that. She tries to rush us in her second phase, sneaking up at you and then requiring you to blast her out of 4 copies that float around. Eventually, a hand comes out of this face hole of hers, and she has a phase 3. A giant pentagram appears on the floor, on which Amy will dash around to all the points, shooting a spiral attack when she stops. Just watch your space and hit her with the divine light when she stops. Most, if not all the fights in this game boil down to avoid enemy attacks and hold up your cross when you can. Amy jumps out of the attic window, and then we're presented with a choice. Downstairs, John will find
A gun with 1 bullet.
And depending on who or what we shoot with this gun will give us a different ending. Let's look at those as they pull a bit of a different spin on the game. Now, our exorcism has been botched for a second time, so most likely players will try to hunt down Amy Miller and Doma 1. They might not even know about the other options you could shoot at. Doing such isn't too much of a hassle. John walks up to her, she's weakened from our second exorcism, and we just pop her one. Later getting pulled over by a state trooper on our exit drive out of there. John then spills all the spaghetti out of his pocket, saying things like, "I've killed her," and "there was a demon inside her," getting him locked up and mostly deemed insane, I imagine. All of her injuries get attributed to John, and he reveals he was never an ordained minister, not in any official capacity anyway. The failed exorcism a year ago stopped that path. It's also revealed that Amy had escaped a psychiatric ward 9 days before the start of the chapter. Now this is ending 1, the murderer, and it heavily implies John's crazy, and it gives the impression that John may have just been seeing all this stuff, but it doesn't explain the carved face or the chupacabra, and it's not the canon ending. Ending 2 is called Father and Son, and this time we just abandon the idea of shooting Amy and take
A gun with 1 bullet.
to a nearby shed, a site in which the exorcism a year ago would have taken place had Amy's parents not got too involved. There's a grey man standing about the place, and if you get too close he runs off. Pop him from afar and then head back to your motor vehicle. We start reciting a Bible verse to calm ourselves, and well, look what happens.
I shall not be afraid.
We then get to bring up the note the creature had dropped earlier. It was a letter addressed to one Father Garcia from Cardinal Gifford, saying to release a person called Michael from his care, as his parents are kicking up a fuss with the church. At the finale of this ending, we get to see Father Garcia's reply, basically saying Michael needs more help now than ever, and that the demon in him is close to being exorcised. He tried to attach a photo to the letter, but it was missing. The monster that pursued us was Michael, and we just shot Father Garcia who was looking for him. As Father Garcia is in the rest of the games, this ending is also not canon. Ending 3 is called The Offering, and we can find a ritual site with a dead fox in the woods. Shooting that and heading to the car lets us make some new friends on the road. We then see a letter from a man named Gary, and that's an important name that will come up later. His letter is basically condemning Amy's parents' concerns and telling her that there's a get-together with the rest of the clinic staff from her workplace and she could attend. While his tone seems caring, he's anything but, as his other letter in this chapter concerned the ritual of the second death. The whole portal face thing that Amy had going on. It was probably 100% his fault, and I imagine he was involved in her getting possessed. Not a canon ending, but all my homies hate Gary. Ending 4, The Hunter, involves us shooting a deer and driving off, and when we do, a deer pops out of the road, and we're crippled swerving to avoid it. Then demon deers attack us. This ending just shows us the forest itself is somewhat under the influence of something profane, but it's not canon. Ending 5, When Faith Endures, has us taking the gun back to the car, getting jumped by Michael and shooting him before he grabs us. He gets mulched by a speeding lorry, and then we're driving away. John can't explain exactly everything he saw at the house, but he did survive the horrors within. He's also left Amy to bleed out in the woods, rather than fully exorcise her, which will continue to play on his mind throughout the next instalments. He's lost some faith somewhat too, which isn't great when it's our only weapon, and we've really achieved nothing, so no wonder he's upset. We didn't exorcise the girl, we got another person killed. The police department actually find his body too and chalk it up to being the Chupacabra. Now, Faith 1's quite a short entry into the series, but the game does serve to show us a bit of plot, that John's trouble started in 1986 at the Martin house, with an exorcism that went wrong. Amy Martin was taken into psychiatric care after this event, and was somehow involved with a colleague of hers, Gary, who'd been trying to drive a wedge between her and her parents. He's also a massive cultist, if that wasn't clear. John returns to the Martin house a year later, but at the same time the possessed Michael had escaped Father Garcia and happens to be outside the Martin house as well. John does a bit of a half exorcism, confronts his fears, and bears a heavy psychological toll from the experience, and of course from shooting Michael. Garcia doesn't manage to stop us and we drive off. Guilt and faith will be some major themes as we continue to head on into Faith Chapter 2. Now, Faith Chapter 2 came out 2 years later and expands upon the story, length and gameplay as a whole from the previous game. It's actually quite lengthy, featuring an optional prologue you can play after completing the game, so we're going to take it out of order gameplay wise for the sake of the story and start with the prologue. Following the canon ending, John has driven away from the Martin residence, and we transition to him stood in front of his now crashed car. John has accidentally crashed into a truck being driven by one of the Second Death cultists, and it's left us in front of Snake Meadow Church, the place where John spent his youth as an orphan, and the focus of Chapter 2 as a whole. I'm going to preface this section with there's a ton of evidence to suggest that Faith 2 and the prologue is one huge nightmare John is having after the second failed exorcism of Amy Martin. John is what we call in the business an unreliable narrator, and so as we look at Chapter 2 as a whole, please take it with a pinch of salt. Now, if we follow the cultist we've crashed into's blood trail, we get led to a cornfield on the outskirts of the church. We exercise a scarecrow there to summon something malicious into the field itself. Entering any adjacent screens leads John to encounter something invisible and unholy trampling the corn underfoot. We have to raise our cross at the thing multiple times to truly banish it. In practice, this means going to the cornfield, catching it before it catches us, leaving, and then repeating the process on the same screen. Sometimes it can come at you from weird angles, which can be a bit of a problem when we defend using cardinal directions, but when John does banish it, he can find a note explaining its presence. The demon had appeared in the 50s, and it's been knocking around for the last 30 years, taking out anyone who comes into the field, including the church orphanage's dog, and 6 orphans who, despite warnings by some of the staff, had wandered in to meet their fates. John then walks to the ruins of the church, the whole place basically falling apart. There's a note here from an unnamed church staff member detailing how another nun was brought in to run the church and look after the children, presumably after the events of the Cornfield Massacre. Her name is Sister Bell, and she came highly recommended by her peers, and with her arrival, new orphans will be moving in. Heading deeper into the church, John exercises a chalice filled with some sort of red liquid, and it would probably be on brand to assume it's blood. Another demon pops out, which follows Amy's old attack pattern of teleporting around us. Take it out, and we get another note by the same staff member. It says that while Sister Bell was a cheery person anyway, when the new children arrived she was ecstatic, doting over them, taking them for walks and telling them stories through the night, but she did engage in some strange behaviour. They'd seen the children dancing around Sister Bell in some sort of circle fashion, where she'd just stand there motionless staring into the sky. They also found the children standing on the edge of a cornfield, where the sister was talking to them. Weirdly, she just seemed to know her way around the church as well, despite never being there before. Perhaps harmless, but spoilers, something's up with Sister Bell. Heading amongst the pews of the church, there's more information, and a lot of this game's story is given to us in notes or other forms of exposition. There's a few examples of in-game environmental storytelling, but really it's mostly written down. Probably an artifact of the game's 80s graphic style. Now I'll cover most of these notes, but the Faith Wiki and obviously the game itself are an opportunity if you want to get more detail. The note by the pews details that a detective was brought in on his last day of retirement to investigate a missing woman, possibly Sister Bell, 4 missing orphans, and a deceased nun. The detective and Father Clark, who now run the place, drive the roads at night looking for them, and I imagine he came in after Sister Bell went missing, which means it's not too much of a reach to say the previous notes were from the dead nun. There's 2 kids remaining, allegedly asleep when the others went missing, probably to the cornfield or dragged somewhere by Sister Bell, and when the detective asks them about Sister Bell's whereabouts, they just tell him to ask her himself, implying she's just stood there like some sort of ghostly apparition that only they can see. Spooky stuff. There's also some interesting stained glass if we go up to the windows with some friendly cultists chanting away. It seems to depict the whole portal face ritual. And after holding a cross to it, John decides to hurry along to one of the places we haven't looked yet, the basement. Finding another note detailing some life-size dolls made of wood that were around the outside of the church. The 2 kids remaining, twins apparently, were fixated on these, staring out at them and saying Sister Bell was stood amongst them, though nobody else could see her. The detective also details his sanity beginning to lapse, seeing people painted in red fitting the description of the Second Death cultists in the cornfields. More notes also lead us to believe Sister Bell herself managed to get the twins and drag them into the basement, ending with the chilling line, "The devil is real. To anyone reading this, please for the love of God don't go down into that basement." So, guess what we do? The basement is pitch black, and so John picks up a flashlight here, and gives us a cone of vision similar to an optional difficulty we could have unlocked for Chapter 1. Going deeper into the basement is something we'll call the Flashlight Demon, which has 2 moves. It'll either teleport around the room, leaving us to find it, or will say, "Here I come," and charge us ever so slowly.
Here I come. Nearby favor.
It's a fairly claustrophobic fight given the reduced vision, but a fun one nonetheless. There's plenty distracting us too, including the twins, cultists, and a dark slender figure, all hallucinations that can't hurt you but will work to unnerve you. Hit this thing with enough crosses and we unlock another note detailing the means to open a door to hell by burning an effigy of the accursed. It needs to be purified and then burnt. Now if we go up past the pews we can end the game early, with the ghosts of the twins leading us to an ambush by Sister Belle. Or we can go out and find the closest thing to an effigy around, the scarecrow in the cornfield. Give it some cross action, then head back to the car, use yourself as a torch and you can bring the fire to the scarecrow, and 9 children appear around the cornstalks. John turns into a demon, and we find Sister Belle there screaming at us, before we wake up from our nightmare and Chapter 2 proper starts. Now, the prologue really serves here to show not only John's descent into madness with this nightmare, but also giving us the background of the church, its occupation by Sister Belle, and the orphan she sacrificed to who knows what in the basement. Theories on the wiki state that the antagonist of the series is trying to emotionally break John by making him relive the church, and while it gives us some context, think of it as a bonus chapter as we get into the main thing now. Chapter 2 proper opens up before the events of Faith 1 from the perspective of Father Garcia, the grey figure we could have shot for the father and son ending, and the one who was trying to exorcise Michael, you know, this guy. Despite the warning that he received from Cardinal Gifford, the exact same note from that ending, to release Michael as his parents are kicking up a stink, he's still trying to cleanse him. We can actually see the missing photos that never made it to Gifford, showing the degradation of Michael over time, starting with 1 day, 2 weeks, and then 3 months. Michael's been here for a long time indeed. Garcia heads to his basement to see him, and he's all tied up with crosses nailed above him. He wants to go home, but we need to make him better first, and the demon starts to taunt us as we begin. Eventually the lights go out, Michael breaks free, and we have to pursue him out of the apartment. When we get out front, we see a ghastly sight indeed.
Dios mío, what have you done?
Michael eats some stranger and then heads off. As we know from Faith 1, both he and Garcia will eventually end up at the Martin home, and this flashback serves to clear that up. When the flashback ends, we're back in John's shoes, awakening at 2 AM in the middle of the woods with nothing to tell us how we got there, besides a note that tells us that the notes we keep finding seem to exist on the edge of memory, whatever that means. John sees a dismembered deer carcass decorating a tree, and when you exercise it, it will explain where we are. We're on the outskirts of Gallup Cemetery. Now, this is in New Mexico in real life, so how we got from Connecticut to New Mexico, again, isn't explained. But John does have a history of nightmares, so maybe we're in another. On editing this, I realised it said the Connecticut Historical Society in that note, so we probably are still in Connecticut. Heading to the cemetery proper, we see more ramblings from cultists, including the line, "I shook hands with the devil, he looked like a long-lost friend," referencing Van Halen. And we also see instructions for getting the blessing of a demon called the Unspeakable, which we'll discuss later. The first tomb we see is that of the Save family. It's in fact the only tomb we'll see. Aptly named because on entry, the game saves. Inside are 3 cultists we can't interact with, and these cultists happen to correspond to 3 demons John will later encounter in the graveyard. Walking up to the mirror at the end of the tomb, we're treated to this cutscene, and we have a new goal: find the demons, get a key. One we'll find to the left of the tomb, obscured by a misty path that loops in the cardinal directions. There were some statues ahead of this that it would indicate which is the right path to take. If we follow the path the statues point out, it summons the Maze Demon. It has an attack pattern similar to the Mirror Demon from Faith 1. All of the demons seem to have quite low health pools in this game, and so we dispatch them with ease. It leaves behind a note detailing a cultist's plight being abused by their father, that during the day they withered, but at night they communed with profane things, and had plans to lure their bullies into the woods to dispatch them. Our second demon hides within the mist a few rooms to the south, that upon entering its room it will hide between rolling clouds of mist, and we need to dispatch it with our cross, making sure not to get touched by as it darts between the different clouds. It leaves a note detailing the loss of a cultist's grandfather being a huge toll for them, Their mum's friends came along offering for them to see their grandfather again, and some sort of doppelganger was summoned, and despite trying to run away from it, they were still recruited to the cult of the Second Death. Our last demon can be found to the right of the save tomb, aptly named the Cord Demon, and you'll see why. It will alternate between chasing John and moving across the screen in a wave-like pattern. Dispatching it will give us a note aptly named Miscarriage, and a cultist had become pregnant. Despite the harsh reception she received for it, she still visited the doctors to pursue the birth. She kept seeing a woman watching her as she did, staring through the windows, and when she lost the child, the stalker was visibly pregnant herself, so somehow she had stolen the child from within her. She was introduced to Gary and joined the cult too. We background for our demons as cultists of the Second Death, but there's another detail we can find. Nestled among the tombstones is another note detailing the obituary of the Martin parents. It says they were survived by their children, Amy, who we know, the portal face, but also the twins, who we know to have not existed. The obituary is factually incorrect, suggesting again all isn't right. It's not a reach to see how John is in yet another nightmare now, believing half the notes he read from Mrs. Martin about her twins and following in her delusions. John isn't in a good place. Heading back to the mirror in the save tomb, we get yet another tree. We're missing an eye now, but we do have our key, and with it we can open a gate that's just standing all on its own. Doing such, more of a graveyard magically appears around us, again, almost like a dream. We head up past some spooky trees to the church we saw in the prologue, Snake Meadow Church. Outside is a note probably relating to Sister Belle. She guards the door to the underground purgatory. "I have not seen her, children fear her," it says. With that, we head on in. Now we get to play a fun game of Chase the Spindly Lady. In each room of the church, there are 8 candles on the ground, each referring to a different screen of the church. 2 are always lit. One is John's position, and the other is the Spindly Lady's. As we enter a screen, she'll move to a different one, and the goal is to enter a room and have her join us. When we do, the screen will begin to shake, and then the fight is on. She'll teleport 3 times around and then charge us. You simply have to dodge and hit her with that holy power. This is sometimes easier said than done, and you can't rush this either. If you just try and run between rooms really fast, she'll jump you anyway. But when it is eventually done, a staircase will appear to take us to the basement, or to the underground purgatory, whichever nomenclature you prefer. There's a note here from Father Clark, the last owner of the church who found himself trapped in the basement after going down to find Sister Belle and the stolen children. His watch was stuck at 2 AM and his ears were bleeding, so hopefully not a sign of things to come. We solve a little puzzle, which I'll leave a surprise for anyone wanting to play these games, and pick back up when John finds his way out of the church. Following the screen round, he finds the bodies of 3 cultists and a note within a pentagram. Picking it up and entering the gram to do it, we see a report of a murder of 3 people off of the outskirts of Gallup Cemetery, matching the descriptions of our 3 cultist demons. Reading further, apparently the murders match that of Amy, who was killed by an impersonated priest, John Ward. But wait, that's not right. As you keep reading, the note will spiral. Look. The note eventually degenerates into Latin, and it translates to "Chaos reigns in the devil's home," ending with "I'm here, John." Then, well... John has turned into some sort of spider demon, and after crossing the path of 2 people trying to fix their truck, he regains his human form. We've hit fever dream levels here as we enter the sewer section. Now a lot occurs here, and I've half a mind to only really cover half of it and leave the rest for people to play. It's a great section. Throughout the sewer we see all the trappings of somewhere like Chirac. Graffiti, paraphernalia, skeletons, the full 9 yards. We get to meet a lovely demonic friend who seems a bit shy. It's got the lovely name of the Peekaboo Demon. We follow it through the sewers, seeing the wake it left, and notes from the police detaining whatever they were dealing with wasn't a crackhead, but something more demonic indeed. I didn't have cops versus demons on my bingo card here, but it seems the demon won the scuffle. There's also some notes from a vagrant who'd been stashing his sweeties in the pipes nearby, detailing that people painted in red come into the tunnels twice a month, that he hears an old woman laughing all the time, as it becomes clear that the cult have a presence in the sewers, perhaps even a base of operations with Sister Belle present there. We have another encounter with the flashlight demon after entering deeper into the tunnels, and then after chasing some cultists, deeper and deeper, we appear at a purple room looking nothing like the sewers. We're deep in the territory of the cult. There's a locked door here, and to get the key we need to exorcise a portrait that's being guarded by some shadows. Now you need to use your flashlight to keep them at bay. You'll have to alternate between torching them and crossing the painting. When it's done, we can get the key, get back, and then Sister Belle will jump out at us. We have some backup this time from Father Garcia himself. Not a single clue why he's here, but he says when 2 or 3 are gathered in God's name, there he will be also. Garcia's with us, God's with us, and we're on to the first boss fight. There's a few caveats to this fight though which are worth mentioning. Garcia will recite the 91st Psalm. We need to balance holding the cross up at the nun whilst also holding it up at cultists that come pouring out of nearby doors. They'll beeline to Garcia, and if they touch him, he dies and we're locked out of an ending. So keep him alive. After enough time, we hit a second phase where Sister Belle copies the flashlight demon from earlier in more of a one-on-one format. Then phase 3 moves back to having our pal back. She's got a variety of attacks that copy the previous movesets of the bosses we've seen, and really, Garcia is mostly safe here. Just look after yourself and hit her with a cross until she turns into a demon. Well, a rather specific one, it takes the form of the unspeakable. And we start up in bed, revealing it was a dream. I told you. There's 3 endings here, so let's go through them. The first, and probably the good ending, is to keep Garcia alive. We get a letter from him telling us the profane Sabbath, a date of huge significance to the cult, is coming up, that the cult are looking for the twins, Nate and Jason, and if they're found, they'll summon a demon called Malphas. Spurred on by Garcia's words, John drives off, monologuing that his nightmares are getting worse, and that his work with Amy's done. He's going to press on and find the twins. It'll be his greatest test of faith yet, and he asks for God's mercy. Our sanity is slightly rocky, but our faith is slightly restored. There's some big themes of the danger of religious institutions being corrupted in this chapter, or those seeking help in the wrong places when we look at Sister Belle's influence or the 3 cultist demon plights. This is the canonical ending as we drive away. Ending 2 is very similar, with the letter this time stating there's still time for John's soul to be saved and to await the next letter, but with John's faith being a bit rocky, you get this one if Garcia dies. Now, there's a third ending, and it's a secret. It gets very, very juicy. Ending 3 is known as the initiation, and has you do a lot throughout the game to get it. The note we got about getting the Unspeakable's blessing needs to be followed to a T, to conjure his demon, serve it, and walk through the children of men as a demon. First, the conjuring. After we try to put our contacts in with a key, we leave a trail of blood behind us wherever we walk. Take that back to the stone circle at the start of part 2, and it lets us draw the special shape and get jumped by a demon from the woods. He'll come at us from random directions, but just stay in the circle and hold your ground as you raise the cross at him. He drops a patient consultation form for one John Thomas Ward by Dr. Spinal. Apparently, unresponsive for half an hour after retelling Amy's initial exorcism. The doctor notes inconsistencies in John's story. First Amy was in the basement, then the attic, where was she? John's deemed mentally unsound, and the Martin family attorneys are informed. Both John and Amy are actually admitted to a mental institution as they're deemed unstable. I believe this note is actually a truth and not some trick by the demons or a nightmare. Anywho, that's step 1 done. Now we have to do some bidding for step 2. Heading into the church, there's a confessional booth we can enter, where we speak to who John presumes is another priest, confessing that he's sinned. He tried to save Amy from evil, but his fear overcame him and he turned his back on the ministry and on God, breaking his promise. And during the second exorcism, he actually left her to die. He weirdly doesn't bring up the Michael stuff though. The priest gives us a rather weird task for penance. There's an orphan behind the church we can lure back here, and when we do, he gets grabbed by the confessional demon. We then have to fight in a room full of black bones. Now it has the same moveset as the mirror demon, but with some fun twists like turning into a black sprite over a mostly black background. Dispatching it gives us more observation notes from Dr. Spinal that reveal John is steadfast in his apparent delusions, though we know these to have been real events. The doctor also asks his colleagues to move Amy to another sanitarium as somehow John knows she's in there with him. Step 3 is walking amongst men, and this is done when John is a spider demon. We take an alternate path not going under the bridge to attack the couple on the top. With all these steps done, we do the rest of the chapter as normal, but when we wake up, instead of a note from Garcia, there's a patient release form for John and our back door is open. Heading back there, we can see the trident wielding Gary and the rest of the cult as we're approached directly by the unspeakable. John staring up at it as his eyes bleed. He's presumably initiated into the cult as a vessel. This ending's not canonical, but the notes within give us the missing time between John's first exorcism and the second. I'd like to take the time to pause and collect what we know so far before moving on to chapter 3. If you followed this enough and don't need a recap, feel free to use the chapters to skip ahead. If not, please continue as normal. So, what do we know so far? Our protagonist John Ward grew up as a child in Snake Meadow Hill Church. A nun there, Sister Bell, was seemingly indoctrinating the children until one day she uses them for some profane ritual to summon something evil, but we don't know what yet. John and another child escape the church, and there are missing children. During this time, Sister Bell takes out the priest and his detective and moves to the Candy Tunnels as a main base for her cult. They use the Peekaboo Demon to gather sacrifices from the local vagrant and cult population. They're summoning something, but who knows what. We then skip ahead in time to the first exorcism. Father Ulred and John Ward go to the Martin house to exorcise the daughter Amy Martin. Her parents are present and the mum is under delusions her twins are alive, but we know them not to be. Amy's possession has some involvement with Gary, having spoke to her at the clinic she worked at, and Gary as a character is very influential in the cult. He seems to be leading it at that point in time. We always see him with the cult, and he's the trident wielding sprite you'll see. The exorcism fails and everyone but Amy and John die, who are both institutionalised as psychiatric institute. Neither can be prosecuted for the deaths as they're deemed mentally unsound, and John makes it out with a full bill of health, despite clearly being on the rocks. Amy later escapes a year later, after her first exorcism attempt. We're then into Faith 1, where John finds out about this and tries to exorcise her, whilst simultaneously but completely unrelated, Father Garcia is trying to exorcise a boy called Michael, who escapes to the outskirts of the Martin house and begins pursuing John. The second exorcism fails, Michael's killed by John, and Father Garcia does a bit of wandering around. All the while, Sister Bell's second death cult are doing some mischief around. It's at this point Gary comes into the picture, having some senior role in the cult, and messing with John mentally, causing him to undergo a series of nightmares as we see in Faith 2 in its prologue. They want Amy for some reason, and as John left her on the verge of death, they're targeting him now. We know the second death cult want to raise a demon called Malphas on the night of the profane Sabbath, and that Garcia wants John's help to stop this. Following it so far? Right, let's get into Faith 3. Faith 3 came out in 2022 and was published alongside the other chapters with some additional features massaged in as the Unholy Trinity. All the other versions had been removed from their respective sites, and so this is the only legal way to play now. It's all packaged up quite nicely. The game is spread across 3 days, each acting as its own level, and the run-up to the profane Sabbath on Halloween night. Each day starts with a nightmare section around the exorcism of Amy Martin. Our first has Father Ulred and John driving to the house. Mr. and Mrs. Martin greet us, and we can confirm there's no twins there. Amy's in the basement, and we go to say hello. Day 1 proper starts with us in John's house, and a repeat of Father Garcia's notes about the cult planning to do something on the profane Sabbath. We pass a crossed up door that John won't enter, and receive a letter from Father Garcia at our doorstep. He can't find the Martin twins anywhere, he doesn't know that they're not alive. While he's digging on that, we need to head to the birth clinic Amy worked at to try and find where the cult planned to summon the demon Malphas. Heading to our car, we pull up on the shady side of town. Nobody around besides a cop who tells us we're in the wrong neighbourhood. We enter the clinic through the back with a lovely pop-up telling us we feel watched. The place is abandoned, doors nailed shut and windows broken. There's correspondence from a Gary Miller here asking to keep everything tidy at the clinic. They can't afford any surprise inspections by the health department, and so he must be warned if they come sniffing around. His tone for the most part seems rather courteous, though he does mention to keep someone called Jeffrey out of sight. He signs off his correspondence with, "Remember, Gary loves you." For a cult leader, he seems like a nice guy. Heading deeper into the clinic, we don't find a whole lot of anything besides some photos of baby scans, with one looking a bit more unnatural than the rest. Grabbing a crowbar, we decide to leave thinking this must be a bum lead. Of course, we find who I believe to be Jeffrey. We're strapped to a gurney and pushed to the basement of the clinic, the music taking a more sinister tone as we're told to hide. We nestle up behind some curtains, and that seems to be enough to throw Jeffrey off for now. He starts combing the room. We do the same trick with some gurneys, eventually being rescued by the officer from earlier. He unties us and we rush for the exit. Of course, getting anywhere near the front door leaves Jeffrey to try and stop us again. Luckily, bullets seem to be just as effective as our cross against him. Pry the planks off, and the policeman chases some cultists who've lit his car on fire. We can find him mulched in an alleyway, but we can't take his
gun with one bullet.
Heading home, it feels like we've not found out much. Maybe there was more to the clinic, but we'll cover that later. We progress to Amy's exorcism, where we must recite prayers whilst the father uses his cross. The parents come down and we have to abandon the father to ward them back upstairs, lest they be afflicted too. Going back down, we see the father's corpse and a message written in his blood to take the cross and save her. We grab it and then wake up. John receives one more letter. Now we're on day 2. Father Garcia writes that there's an apartment building nearby where the cult may be trying to summon Malphas. We also receive letters from a friend of ours, Lisa, who basically states the same, but she lives in the building. So we head on over to Among the Damned. The building is made up of 10 floors, and so it's probably a good idea to check the letterboxes on the ground floor just to see who lives where. Going there, we see a fake note from Lisa saying everything's fine and not to worry. Lisa's in room 05A. The spare key to our room is with her neighbour in 3B. Travel up on the elevator to get the key and a nice hallucination from Amy. This apartment block is owned by Gary and is full of the shenanigans of the second death cult. One such shenanigan is a ritual seal blocking our way into Lisa's bedroom. To break the seal of a loo, we need to find a mask and a knife in the apartment, and one is much easier to source than the other. Now, throughout the place, we'll find notes either from or about a cultist named Tiffany, who's become jealous of Amy's role in Gary's big plan and is working to steal her place. We'll put a pin in that until later. Find the dagger, exercise it, and then head up to the top floor and follow the advice of a note saying to sacrifice what we hold on to. It's the cross. John then has fun shenanigans of descending from the top floor of the place down to the basement without said cross. I won't spoil too much here as it doesn't relate to the meta narrative and it's probably my favourite section in the game. Just know for the most of this, the lights cut out and you have to use a flashing camera as your only source of light to weasel your way around an eerily quiet and quite lethal apartment block. Getting to the basement, we find out Tiffany has done something with the ritual mask to upset Gary and she's fled to a place called the Unseen World. Exercise the mask and head back left. We fight a demon that's invisible but will light candles underfoot like some reversed phasmophobia pursuer. Reaching the top of the basement, we get our first glimpse of the demon Alu, whose seal was blocking Lisa in, and well, it gets a bit weird. Maybe we've accidentally released the demon by breaking the seal, I don't know. John reunites with a now possessed Lisa and we have to exorcise Alu out of her. It will hide between a load of statues whenever we do, and then we can directly damage it. Rinse and repeat to save our friend. She tells us Gary runs this place and he's trying to resurrect a horrid demon. We need to stop him. We head back now that she's relatively safe, again feeling like we've missed something in the apartments. Our next nightmare plays out how you'd imagine. We confront Amy in the attic, she taunts us with our dead mum, and then we wake up after holding the cross to her. Our final stop now is a daycare centre where the children have allegedly been acting strange, and the place Garcia bets they're trying to summon Malphas. Head on over in your car and it's an exciting scene indeed. Police have actually beat us there, cordoned off the place and set up ready to fire at anyone exiting. We sneak in through the back of the building. There's a taunting letter from Gary saying he'll show us how to make a portal to hell if we come find him. And we enter. The daycare has this rough music to it, slightly foreboding and full of children's drawings of some mild disturbance. A silly scene we can get after seeing the police cordon out front is exiting using the front door where the police do their best against a priest holding a cross. The children's drawings are mostly unsettling, showing demons and the like throughout. We use these to solve a puzzle and enter the tunnels beneath the place. This is where things get exceptionally weird, as we enter presumably the actual headquarters of the Order of the Second Death. There's a few notes dashed around aimed at the acolytes of the cult, and plenty of those waiting in the wings too. Upon entry, we're given a checkpoint and given a new puzzle. There's a load of chairs on a chessboard, and we need to orientate them by moving some levers in a room above. It's a bit of a bait and switch, and trigger warnings for needles here. We get ambushed by Gary himself as he jabs us with something, and we get flashbacks to John's youth, the orphanage, Sister Belle, and apparently Lisa was the second child who came with us. Whatever we've been jabbed with has seemingly made us slightly mad as the visions get worse and worse, ending with the text saying, "Now you're ready." We're being prepared for something, we don't know what. We fall unconscious and get one last nightmare of the Martin house, and we can either exit or go into the basement to end this nightmare. If we exit, Amy turns off the lights and we wake up elsewhere in the cultist hideout. We're surrounded by the viscera of a large shootout, and my headcanon is that John just blasted them with his hands alone. There's a demonic statue that requires 3 keystones to progress, and they're hidden among 3 different encounters here. A red light, green light game, a fight against the true mirror demon, and a fight with a rather long-armed cultist. I'm really glossing over a lot here. Keystones in hand, we literally progress into the belly of the beast. A series of dark tunnels and multiple jump scares that eventually become lit up by only lantern light. It's a small radius around John himself, so we can't see much. There's one last seal we need to crack down here in the darkness, and it feels like we're descending into hell itself. We need to sneak around a dark forest, exercising 3 different chained cultists to unlock the inner sanctum. Monsters absolutely flood out of everywhere, and I think they just spawn in randomly on the screens. This happens the whole time you're pursuing these different cultists. I found this section the spookiest of all. I hated not being able to see properly, and I got lost a couple of times trying to find shortcuts. Enter the sanctum, and we must march ahead, surrounded in the darkness by harmless cultists and demons. Gary himself asks us, "How do you make a portal to hell?" He drops this monologue as we walk up to him. He says sometimes it comes to the one who's already walked through it. Again, we walk further. Sometimes it opens itself in the darkest room where nobody can find it. Again, we walk further. Sometimes it comes walking right up to you, as we walk right up to Gary himself. He seems happy to finally meet us. In John's fear, John prays for safety, and we actually have a moment where he appears to speak with God. Gary speaks with us before the battle, saying he'll give us 3 questions, and it's a bit of a multiple choice here. Asking Gary about himself, he says he's just a normal human being, just like the rest of us. He wants to bring the Antichrist into the world. Spoilers, he's not a human being, and so take half of what he says with a pinch of salt. Demons are known to lie. He tells us the twins were an illusion. He also starts to degenerate as he talks, getting more monstrous in appearance. He's mad at us for getting rid of Amy. It's somehow put a damper on his plan. He then begins to fight us. Gary's boss fight begins with an on guard as he dashes around the screen. Taking a hit here won't kill us, and instead drops our cross, which we'll need to regather, or he will kill us on the next hit. He can throw tridents at us, summon all manner of demon, and generally be a nuisance. His Rain of Spiders attack though is a little bit silly. The game really feels like it's done being a horror at this point, bringing more cheese than anything else. Gary's fairly easy to dispatch though, especially if you abuse him being stunned whenever we regain the cross. Just when we think he's about to grab us, we get a cracking cutscene. We chase Gary deeper towards the crucible of the profane Sabbath. There's a seal stopping us chasing him, deep into it, but we can lock the crucible with him inside. In doing such, we get one of the endings of the game. Garcia and John are resting by the car, knowing that one day the horror will return, as the Unholy Trinity and Gary himself haven't been dispatched, only trapped. He asks us to help him. We tell him we're still having visions of Amy, and that really we're losing our faith. It's a rather bleak ending despite us getting through the game. There's some hope there, but really it's quite bittersweet. What we need to do is go back and figure out how to pop that seal. Popping the seal is the second ending. There's a secret in each of the chapters you'll need to uncover and exercise before progressing to break part of the seal. An unholy trinity, if you will. In the clinic, We get back in the gurney and take it down a flight of stairs after a cultist who's undergone the second death runs at us. There's a mother and child possessed down here and we have to exorcise them, all while these little pink blobs come chasing us. 3 guesses what they are. Carrying this out gets a taunting note from Gary saying the twins aren't at the clinic and to remember Gary loves us. In the apartment, we have to spam the number 7 on the elevator until we're hunted down by an elevator friend. Exorcise him, then play the elevator game to get a Japanese demon in the lift with you. Ascend to the other world. To find Tiffany, the one who was jealous of Amy. Despite saying she's a normal human just like you and I, she's definitely not. In the cultist HQ, there's a painting we'll pass a few times to get the keystones. Eventually, the face of the nun pictured and the sun itself in the background will become blotted out and will start to be pursued by a giant meatball. It can spawn in from any edge of most of the screens down there and attack us. You can effectively cheese it by staying close to a screen transition and running away whenever it gets close. If it hits us, we go back to our time in the sanitarium, so just avoid that. From there, get back to the Gary boss fight as normal and the seal will be open afterwards. We can descend into the crucible without any bother. Garcia stays back to deal with the cultists. The crucible looks like the Martin house until we enter the attic to find a big purple boss room. Upon finding Gary, he's gone full demon mode and tells us to behold his mother, Sister Belle. She was going to become the vessel for the Trinity, and then Amy, when the old woman's body failed, but we put a stop to both of his plans. Gary tells us from here, we'll be the first to witness the Sabbath, and only one of us gets out alive. And for the first time, he tells us that Gary doesn't love us. Gary too is a rough old fight. He'll chase us around quite a tight room, putting down sigils we can't pass and occasionally dashing at us. Avoid his charges and just loop around him. Eventually, he summons in Malphas to start the second phase of the fight. Malphas will begin to attack us alongside Gary. They share a health pool, so dodge both and attack either while doing more of the same cross action. Don't accidentally touch the flames in the corner of the room either. Eventually, as a last ditch effort, both demons enter the body of Sister Belle in an attempt to kill us. The Mother, the Son and the Spirit all united in a sort of faux unholy trinity. You can take some damage here as your faith protects you, but take too much and the fragility of the flesh and your waning faith will catch up to you. If you can deal enough damage to separate the spirits from the flesh, we can make the ultimate sacrifice, bathing ourselves in fire to burn the nun's body. We survive with some intervention from God himself. Amy's not happy with Gary's failed attempts, or at least something talking through Amy. These failed attempts at bringing in the Antichrist, and a hand reaches through her portal, taking him back to hell. John makes peace with the fact he couldn't save Amy, and she tells him it's okay, she can't be hurt by the cult anymore, putting a nail in the coffin of his trauma. We exorcise her finally this time, crawling out of the crucible covered in blood, and we see Garcia again, our faith entirely restored. We've destroyed a mighty demon and the Sabbath, but not stopping the unspeakable that's been pulling the strings the whole time. We get the choice to hang back with Lisa or ride on with Garcia to continue the Holy Crusade against the unspeakable. Could you guess which choice I made? I consider this the canon ending given all the extra work it takes, but there is one other ending we could do. Ending 3. If we leave each location as soon as we arrive and just sleep through until the profane Sabbath, Gary's cult will win. They'll summon the unholy trinity and the end upon us all. John wakes up knowing it's the end and there's a knocking at our door. We look through the peephole to see cultists ready to ravage. We flee to the basement only to be pursued by a particularly horrifying looking demon. Grabbing a key to the room we'd nailed shut and never entered throughout the chapter, we charge in there, seeing John's new intake form for the psychiatric ward and Amy herself. Now, it's not clear if she was really trapped in here or it's just one of John's nightmares again. I imagine she wasn't here the whole time or she couldn't have been at ending 2. She drags us through her little face portal and we end up at the Martin house with the same soundtrack playing from part 1. We see a note revealing the twins never existed, and when we kneel in front of 2 effigies of them, we're grabbed by Michael and Amy, 2 allegedly dead possession victims. Then a big red hand matching the unspeakable grabs us. This ending's called Damnato Memoriae, or Condemnation of a Memory, and I saw this ending really as the weight of John's guilt causing his mind to collapse, a condemnation in response to memory. There's theories online that state John may have ended himself, a cardinal sin in that faith that would have caused the devil to grab him, and I don't think they're wrong with that theory at all. Anyway, that's all of the faiths done, so shall we conclude?
Well, you have come this far.
In conclusion, the main themes can really be boiled down to the struggle one has with their own faith and the struggle that guilt puts us under. John still faces evil despite this pressure, but there are countless endings where it becomes too much for him to bear. The whole series has him crippled by guilt of failing to exorcise Amy during the first exorcism, and the effect that has in driving him forward. He fights back against the Cult of the Second Death, countless demons, and Gary Miller himself, their leader if you will. But all of that was just to buy more time in the struggle, as he's not got rid of the big bad, the unspeakable. It's a balancing force to the god he worships. The game's art style and simplistic gameplay may be off-putting for some, but I really enjoyed my time with Faith, and what I had planned to be a very short video spiraled out when I dug deeper into the lore. It's a cracking set of games, and I fully recommend them. John goes from a bit of a loser priest into a warrior of God, making a noble sacrifice to shut the gates of hell. Father Garcia runs support in the third game, and between them, they have some cracking scenes and lines of dialogue. The cult presence with Gary at the helm seems oppressively intertwined into the local area, owning the apartments, the daycare, the medical clinic, and probably countless other businesses. He's oppressively intertwined into John's own nightmares too. The characters are there, and the horror element is definitely there too. They make the best possible use of the format they've chosen. Good scares, good memes, over and out Smooth Brains.